Thank you so much for joining us on this special day. I'm your host, Myra Yacher from Cranbury Hill, a brand new project with a mission to spread the love of cut flower gardens. Also with us today is Miss Janet Miller, our local leading Rosarian and the president of the Louisville Rose Society right here in the bluegrass state of Kentucky, in the heart of the United States, and where every first Saturday in May since 1875, we've held the most important horse race in the country and the most exciting 2 minutes in sport, also known as the Run for the Roses at the Kentucky Derby. Together, we welcome you to today's lecture, The Beautiful World of Roses, with the iconic and world-renowned rose alchemist, expert, and designer, Michael Marriott, who has devoted over 35 years of his life making a huge impact in the rose world through his key roles as technical director and senior Rosarian at David Austin Roses, where he retired last year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And through his stunning design work at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, Queen Mary's Rose Garden, Botanic Garden in Wales, Wynyard Hall, David Austin Roses Garden in Senan, Japan, among many others. Currently, he continues his work and legacy in education through his course All About Roses on learningwithexperts.com, which I highly recommend, and just recently founded Todd Garden Tours. You can check those projects on his website, michaelmarriottrosarian.org. We are honored and excited to have you with us, Michael. And before I hand it over to you, I just wanted to share one of my favorite quotes of yours that really resonated with me while taking your course, which is, smelling a rose is a very personal thing. Enjoying the fragrance and remembering that smelling roses on a regular basis is a very good thing to do. It has this wonderful ability to calm us down and at the same time lift our spirits. So without further ado, here's Mr. Michael Marriott.
You've frozen. Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Myra. A wonderful introduction. It's great, as I was saying just now, it was great to be able to talk to people around the world so easily without having to hop on a plane for hours on end and do lots of traveling. So it's been great. So yeah, the beautiful world of roses. Of course, roses are just the most wonderful plants that you can get. I always argue that they're the most garden worthy of all plants. I mean, after all, what other plant can potentially give you a most beautiful flower, have a fantastic fragrance, be easy to look after, and be in flower for 5, 6, 7 months of the year. So there's just no plants that can vie for that at all, really. It really is. Why people don't plant more roses in their garden, I don't know. Well, I do know, because I think they think that they're a bit difficult to grow. But of course, if you choose the good varieties and spend a bit of time preparing the ground, they're dead easy to grow. So let's anyway have a look at what I want to talk about tonight. If this is going to move forward, come on. It's not moving forward. Here we are. Okay, I think it's gone to sleep. So yeah, tonight I want to talk about David Austin and his roses, which he decided to call English roses, which I know for a lot of people around the world is a little bit confusing because, you know, they're just roses from England. But of course, he actually decided to call them English roses as opposed to the Scots roses, which are a hybrid of Scots roses, of Rosa spinosissima, or the Gallicas, which is French, of course, for the French roses. So he thought, well, a group called the English roses would be a good idea. So to give you a brief history of him, he was brought up in the county where I live now, still Shropshire, and brought up as a farmer's son. And he spent a lot of time initially on the farm, developing various things, growing potatoes and corn, well, not corn as in maize, but corn as in wheat and barley, and having cattle and things like that. But rather unusually for a farmer, he always had a great passion for plants, for gardens and plants. And but in those days, when he was a young man, in sort of when he was in his teens and 20s and things like that, he didn't really like the roses at all that were around at that time. They were mostly the sort of hybrid teas, and he really didn't like them very much at all. But the old roses, the old damasks and gallicas and albas and things like that were practically unknown, because everybody had rejected those because they only flowered once and they had a sort of rather old-fashioned appearance. Everybody wanted the newfangled hybrid tea rose. But he did, his sister gave him a book on old roses, and he thought, yes, gosh, these are really beautiful. But at the same time, he realized their limitations, the fact that they only flowered once, and there was none of them had yellow or apricot in them. They're all just either pink, white, or red, or purple, some of them purple. And that's when, for him, that was an epiphany, because he also had, through his father, become fascinated by the idea of breeding new varieties of plants. But the challenge was, what plant should he start working on? And so when he saw these old roses that were very beautiful but had limitations, he thought, well, maybe I could try and breed new varieties of roses. And so that's what he did, just as an amateur, just as something to entertain himself with. And so his first cross was trying to combine the repeat flowering qualities of modern roses. So he used, one of the roses he used was Dainty Maid, which repeats well. And then he crossed it with the Gallica called Belle Isis, which is quite a nice little Gallica, but only once flowering. And out of those two, he got a real surprise, actually, something that, that doesn't quite make sense somehow. But that's what happens when you breed, when you cross roses. You can get all sorts of great surprises coming out. So what he got was this rose with great big pink flowers and a very, very strong fragrance. And he showed it to his friend, Graham Thomas. Graham Thomas was a very famous rosarian at that time. And he was really one of the main people responsible for the resurgence of the old roses. And he was also nursery manager of a big nursery down in the south of England that sold a lot of the old roses. So he took it down to Graham Thomas, and he immediately said, oh yes, this is a fantastic rose, I'll start selling it. And they decided to call it Constance Spry. And Constance Spry was a very famous flower arranger and did a lot of work for the royal family over here. And also was a very keen, she was very keen on the old roses. But this rose wasn't really what he wanted, because it still only flowered once. So very beautiful rose, fantastic fragrance, but still only flowered once. So he carried on breeding. Here's a picture of Constance Spry, actually, at a garden over in the east part of England. And I must just tell you a very quick story about this, this picture, because you notice through the gate there, there's a sheep in the field. And so all the photographs that I'm showing you tonight, and a lot of them on the website and the catalogue, were all taken by a very good photographer called Howard Rice. And he and I have worked together for maybe 20, 25 years to take these wonderful photographs. And so when we went to this garden called Eastern Wall Garden, we decided that to complete the perfect bucolic field to the photograph, we should have a sheep in the field. So there was a whole bunch of sheep, a whole flock of sheep in the field, but they weren't in the right place. So what you can't see is me chasing the sheep to get that sheep in the shot. So that was a success. But anyway, yeah, Constance Spry, there you are. It's beautiful climbing rose and fantastic fragrance. So he carried on breeding. He wanted to try and create this repeat flowering rose that looked like the old rose. And eventually, by the end of the 60s, he succeeded, and he had his group of roses, and that's when he decided to call them English roses. Of course, over there where you are, I think you probably call them the Austin roses or the Dave Lostin varieties. And so he went round to other rose growers around the country and said, you know, I've bred these new varieties of roses that look like the old roses, but they repeat flower and have a wonderful fragrance and all the rest. And because by then, we're talking about the late 60s, 70s, hybrid teas were so popular. I mean, the same in the States, I think. They were selling by the absolute million. I said Jackson Perkins was selling probably well over 20 million roses a year. And over here, we had rose growers that were selling 2, 3, 4 million every year. And so to hark back to these old roses that nobody really liked was just completely crazy as far as they were concerned. So they all told him to go away and try and do something a bit more useful with his life rather than trying to breed these silly roses. Of course, he ignored them and he decided to start up his own nursery. So he decided to start up David Austin Roses, and that was in 1969. Bit of a crazy thing to do, really, trying to compete with these other huge rose growers. But slowly the English roses got a certain amount of recognition from gardeners, and he had his huge, great breakthrough in 1983 when he introduced 3 very good varieties, and there were Mary Rose, Heritage, and then the one at the top there, which I'm sure a lot of you will recognize, is Graham Thomas, and a lot of you will be growing in your gardens, is Graham Thomas. And when that was introduced at the Chelsea Flower Show in 1983, it attracted a huge amount of attention, and everybody wanted to know about David Austin and his English roses. So that was such a stroke of luck. Well, luck or good fortune, or just breeding the right sort of varieties. I think actually it's interesting that it should be a yellow rose that changed the fortune of David Austin, because a lot of people, for some reason I never understand why, don't like yellow roses. I mean, I think yellow roses are beautiful, but some people just don't like yellow roses. Maybe it's more of an English thing. It'd be interesting to ask you about that when the talk is finished, about whether the Americans don't like yellow roses or whether they're all happy about them. But anyway, that was the great change of fortune for David Austin, 1983. And I was very fortunate. I joined a couple of years later in 1985. So a little bit more money started coming in, lots of visitors come to the nursery wanting to know all about the English roses. And so as far as I was concerned, I joined exactly the right time. It was fantastic, very great stroke of fortune. So let's have a quick look at about how we breed the roses. You see the top picture there, the person is very carefully collecting the pollen from the flower. So what you have to do is, when the flower is still at the bud stage, or sort of just about to open up bud stage, the petals are all stripped off, and with a knife, the stamens are very carefully collected off them and put in a little glass jar. Those stamens are immature, so no pollen has been released, so you can't get self-fertilization, self-pollination. That pollen goes in a warm oven at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. The pollen is released, and then it gets distributed the following day. So the picture bottom left there shows all the different flowers that have got to be pollinated with that pollen that's been allocated. And then the person there on the bottom right, she's actually applying the pollen just with an ordinary little paintbrush onto the stigma of the flowers. And then hopefully a few months later, in about sort of September, October time, the hips will be formed, and they'll turn red, and then they're ready for harvesting. So the seeds, the hips are all harvested, the seeds are extracted out of the hips, and then they're sown one by one in a plug tray. So here's a plug tray, lots of little individual cells, and to give you an idea of the scale of the breeding program, they do something like 140,000 different crosses to produce about 400,000 seeds. From that, we get about 250,000 seedlings, and that's all for about 3 or 4 varieties that get introduced at the end of the day. So huge amount of work, and very expensive, of course, as well, because it's all done in greenhouses and all has to be heated. But to get the beautiful roses at the end of the day, then it all makes it worthwhile. So there's the seedlings germinated, they get pricked out into beds. This is all inside the greenhouse. And there's David Austin, taken a few years ago now, going through and looking for those beautiful roses. So we've got about 4 greenhouses like that. This will be a picture taken probably in about May or June time, end of May, beginning of June. And it's a matter of going around every day with some canes and looking for the beautiful roses. All you can tell at that stage is the flower beautiful? Can't tell anything about how healthy it's going to be, or whether it's going to make a nice shrub or not. It's just is a pretty flower. Only about 10% of those get selected, and the rest just get thrown away. And then the ones that are selected get budded onto a rootstock outside, and then again the most beautiful ones are selected, but of course the healthy ones as well, because a lot of them get very, very bad disease in the first year. So then they're all rejected, and gradually they're whittled down until this is the sort of final stages of the breeding program, of the trials. And so somehow they have to choose between those varieties to see which are the most beautiful, which are the most fragrant, which produce most flowers, which repeat very well, of course, and most importantly, which stay healthy, because all of these aren't sprayed at all. So huge disease pressure there. So let's have a look at a few new recent varieties. These were introduced probably in the last 10 years or something like that. Desdemona, beautiful white flowers, so medium size and most gorgeous fragrance. I took 2 or 3 plants down to my sister a couple of years ago in the back of the car, and the fragrance coming from those roses was just absolutely superb. And then Olivia Rose Austin was a real breakthrough when that was introduced. Super healthy variety, and I think stays pretty healthy in most of the states as well. Bathsheba climber, a lovely climber growing up maybe 8-10 feet, and very strong myrrh fragrance. And then Royal Dahl, a lovely apricot one, again medium-sized flowers, and a lovely tea fragrance. And I'll be talking about fragrance at the end of my talk, so I'll be telling you which ones they are, but just looking at fragrance a bit more detail at the end. Then these some varieties introduced 2017, 2018. So David Austin was always obviously loved the very full flower, but he actually loved all shapes of flowers. He actually really liked singles and semi-doubles as well. And so Tottering by Gently was introduced a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, completely single flowers, just 5 petals, flowers incredibly freely. And then if you don't deadhead it, then a wonderful crop of hips appear that last right through winter. I'm not sure what happened in your Kentucky winter. They might not like it so much, but certainly in England, then the hips stay on it right through until January, February time. Dame Judi Dench, lovely apricot one with a tea fragrance, big flowers, and Vanessa Bell, lovely soft yellow one. I think that's got a tea fragrance as well. I can't quite remember now, but very, very free flowering. New introductions for last year, oh no, this year, 2021, this year, isn't it? Gabriel Oak, lovely strong pink, lovely old rose fragrance, very healthy, very free flowering. And then Eustacia Vi, lovely fruity fragrance and quite a changeable color. It starts off soft apricot, then changes to pink and a big open flower, lots and lots of petals. A lot of these will have well over 100 petals. And then looking forward to next year, hopefully these two will be introduced. It's got a Scottish rose background, so it's got Rosa spinosissima not far in its background. They're well known for being incredibly tough. The original species grows around the coast of the UK and Europe, over into Russia as well. So incredibly tough rose, grows on sand dunes, and able to withstand very strong winds. And when it produces flowers, the hips afterwards are black. So it's very interesting rose. Very, very thorny stems as well, really super vicious thorny. So breeders have been able to cross that original species with repeat flowering roses and get these repeat flowering varieties out of them. And they give a very different sort of character to the rose, very pretty. And then Silas Mana, medium-sized soft pink rose with a lovely fragrance. That's incredible. You can see the number of buds there, incredibly free flowering and very healthy rose as well. So all these varieties are introduced at the Chelsea Flower Show, which if ever you get the chance to come across to the UK, then you must try going to that. It is just the most amazing spectacle you can imagine. Because of working for David Austin's, I've been to it every single year for, I think, well, 35 years, or more than that, I suppose. But it is amazing, and the David Austin Garden is one of the best stands that they have at the Chelsea Flower Show. It is a huge amount of work, but just an absolute mass of roses. But all the other different gardens and nurseries that display there at the Chelsea Flower Show, it is absolutely amazing. This is usually the end of May, but because of the restrictions over here still, COVID, then it's been moved to September this year. So it'll be very interesting to see. It'll be a very different Chelsea this year. So let's have a look at some shots of the roses in the gardens. This is the David Austin Rose Garden, which is really one of the very best rose gardens in the world. I've spent a lot of time traveling around the world looking at rose gardens, and it is maintained to incredibly high standards, got a wonderful range of different varieties, separated up into about 6 different areas, different rose gardens, each with a slightly different feel to it. Lots of climbers and ramblers and shrub roses and wild roses as well, which I'm always very keen on. So you can see here one of the borders, absolute mass of flowers. And one of the things that we're always very keen on there is to plant them quite closely together. Not too close, obviously, so they're actually crowded out, but so close enough so that there's really, they all join up and there's no soil visible between the roses, which I always think looks so beautiful and is very important for the health of the soil as well. And another part of the border, you can see at the background there, one of the greenhouses where the seedlings are grown. It's one where just saw a picture of David Austin looking at the new seedlings. So again, you can see absolute mass of flowers. This will be sort of middle or end, second half of June usually. Absolute mass of roses and always very, very beautiful, maintained to a very high standard. But the problem with rose gardens, of course, is that they're monocultures, and then that's when the pests and diseases can spread more easily around from one plant to the other. And there's been a lot of interest in the last few years of mixing up roses with other plants. It's not a new idea, of course. It was very popular in the 19th century. William Robinson did that sort of thing. And it's a great way of breaking up that monoculture. And also, so the pests and diseases don't spread so easily. And also it just enhances the roses. I think it helps to contrast the roses against the very different flowers of the perennials. So you can see there on the left, Cirsium atroproparium, lovely deep purple flowers, quite small flowers. And then in the foreground there's Stachys, again, looking very, very good against the Princess Anne roses there. So this is a fantastic garden called Wynyard Hall, which I helped to design. It's a 4-acre wall garden planted about 4 or 5 years ago. And really, if you come across to England, you ought to try and make this one of the rose gardens to see. It is absolutely superb. And there's a great big, so Wynyard Hall is a great big house that has been turned into a hotel. So a wonderful place to stay and have dinner as well, if you want to treat yourself. Again at Wynyard Hall, this is Lady of Shalott, one of my very, very favorite varieties. Incredibly free flowering. Fragrance isn't so strong, but still good. and lovely apricot color that fades a bit with age. And there you've got the geum in the foreground and Nepeta in front of that. Nepeta always looks very good with just about any rose, really. You just got to be a bit careful with Nepeta catmint. You call it Nepeta, I think, don't you? Catmint, it can be very vigorous and sort of overwhelm things, especially when roses are young. So there are one or two varieties that are not so vigorous. The one we grow over here is called Kit Kat. But the normal one is called Six Hills Giant, which is a bit of a monster and a bit of a thug. So you just got to be a bit careful about where you plant that. But Lady Charlotte, wonderful, wonderful variety. You can grow it as a sizable shrub for 4 or 5 feet tall, or actually makes a lovely climber as well, where it'll get up to 8, 10 feet without too much trouble. Another superb garden. This is Wollaston Old Hall, and this is one of the very, very best private gardens in the whole of the UK. Again, a garden that if you come across, you must go and visit. It's just absolutely superb. And here you've got Gertrude Jekyll with Nepeta again in the foreground, and lovely foxgloves growing up at the back. And then you can see a hint of the house in the background there. It's 16th century house, timber framed house. Unfortunately, you can't go around it, but you can admire it from the outside. And always very good, very important, of course, visiting gardens. It's a wonderful place to have tea and cakes and lunch as well. Oh dear, the cats are just coming. The feral cats demanding supper. This is the garden I designed in Japan, which Myra talked about. So this is a lovely mixed border, and I think that picture really shows how well perennials go with roses. There you've got the lovely lamb's ear, the silver leaves, just contrasting so beautifully with the dark flowers. I think that rose, the dark flowers must be Falstaff. I can't quite remember now. But looking beautiful as well with the yellow rose on the left, which I think must be Tees in Georgia. So yeah, do try and mix in perennials, or it doesn't have to be perennials. Biennials, of course, are very effective too, and some of the annuals are very lovely. Do try and mix them up with the roses. It just looks so beautiful and it breaks up that monoculture. So here's a few little detailed shots. Desdemona with Astrantia. There's so many different shades of Astrantia, some much more of a powdery pink, some really dark ones, almost blood red ones, and some paler ones as well. So you can choose different varieties according to the variety of rose that you've got. And one of the secrets of when you want to try and choose what perennial to go with a rose, pick a flower and then hold it up, carry it around your garden or wherever you've got it, and hold it up against your rose, and just see which ones look good together. Some will look not very good, their colors will clash, others will look okay, and then suddenly some of them just will shout out and look really beautiful. So that's the plants that you need to plant together. But remember not to plant them too closely. So a lot of these varieties, things like Rudbeckia, and of course the Nepeta and geraniums and things like that, they can spread quite rapidly. And what roses really don't like is having other plants growing right around the base of the rose. So when you plant your other plants next to the rose, have a nice space so that the flowers end up sort of cuddling up to each other, but you don't want the actual plant to be growing right around the base of the rose. Otherwise it'll be sucking all the goodness and moisture out of the ground, and the rose really won't like that at all. So with the Rudbeckia, of course, it's autumn flowering, fall flowering. And so because roses are repeat flowering, you can take advantage of the later flowering of the roses by planting. It gives you a wider range of plants to choose from. And on the right there is one of my very favorite geraniums, Cashmere Blue, and the foxglove, the wild foxglove, just looking very, very, very pretty with Royal Dahl. Pottering by gently. So those of you, I don't expect any of you know where the name comes from, and I didn't know actually when it was suggested at the nursery. It's a name of a cartoon for a very, very posh magazine called Country Life that comes out every week. So it's for all the people who live out in the countryside and got, you know, great big houses and horses and things like that. So Tottering by Gently, the cartoon, it's about a sort of fairly elderly couple who live out in the country with their dogs and their horses. And so it's a story about country life, really. And it's very humorous, very funny. So it was 25 years, it celebrated 25 years of the cartoon being published in this Country Life magazine. So they're looking very pretty with Buthalmum, which is a very simple daisy flower. That's all you want with that. You don't want anything too complicated to go with it. You want a nice simple flower, and then Santalina in the bottom left. As I said earlier on, annuals are very good too. I always find a lot of annuals not very nice plants, but there are some annuals which are very pretty. So things like Cosmos and Nigella are very lovely. And this is one of my very, very favorites, which I think is a native of the States of North America, Phacelia, Phacelia tanacitifolia, which is, I think, a very pretty flower. It's got a nice little fragrance. It's a member of the borage family. And so it's incredibly attractive to bees and other insects. So that's a very, very good reason to grow it. It's just a great way of encouraging lots of insects in your garden that will hopefully then help to control pests that you have in your garden as well. And it grows very quickly from seed. It self-seeds itself around the place. But if it gets a bit out of hand, then it's the easiest thing to pull up as well. And it's very good for the soil as well. So it's a brilliant wildflower. I think you've also got over there Phacelia companion. Oh gosh, I can't remember. Flowers like a campanula folio or something. Flora. I can't remember the name. You'll have to look it up. It starts with C, C-A-M-P, I think. But anyway, Phacelia tanacitifolia, brilliant annual. Really, really good. I grow it all the time. As I said, with the repeat flowering of the roses, you can take advantage of the later flowering ones. So here we've got Aster Monk. I know asters aren't called asters anymore, of course. The official name of them has changed to something else, Symphyotrichon, I think. But anyway, I think everybody else is still calling them asters. But they're looking very pretty with Boscobel. And Boscobel has just got the most amazing myrrh fragrance. Myrrh and something else, about elderflower, I think. And then Gara in the foreground. So the white flower out of focus is Gara Lindheimeri, which goes on flowering for a very long time. So that's how all the different ways you can grow them in mixed borders. And really you can, just there's so much choice in terms of perennials and biennials and annuals. As I say, it's a matter of seeing what looks good together, really, trying to choose plants that look good with your roses. So carry them around, see what looks good, and then plant them next to each other. But the secret is they've got to be flying at the same time. So it's no good having something that flowers 2 weeks before the rose or 2 weeks after the rose. You want to choose something that flowers at the same time to get that really magical effect. But roses, of course, are incredibly versatile plants. You can plant them in all sorts of different ways in the garden, not just in borders or mixed borders. If you choose the right varieties, they make the most superb hedge. So here we've got Olivia Rose Austin, looking very beautiful as a hedge. It starts flowering very early in the season and then repeats very quickly. And then if you keep it trimmed, then you keep it a very nice, neat hedge. It is important to choose really good, tough varieties for hedges, I think. Harlow Carr is another of my favorite varieties. Wonderful, wonderful old rose fragrance and super prickly as well. And so that would be a real deterrent to anybody wanting to come through that hedge, whether it's four-legged person or not four-legged person, but a four-legged creature or a two-legged person. and beautiful flowers. Not the best for cutting because it's so thorny, but I mean, if you can sort of get your gloves on, then it makes a lovely little cut flower. And then Kew Gardens, which is complete reverse in terms of thorns. It hasn't got any thorns at all. It's completely and utterly thornless, which is very, very rare in the plant world. Single white flowers. And you can see there, look, the flowers are being produced right from the ground, right up to the top. It is really an absolutely amazing variety. And I've seen this growing in hotter climates in Japan, where the leaves turn the most beautiful autumn color as well. They can be grown as standards, or you call them tree roses, of course, over there. So I always think that the stems of roses, on tree roses, are not very beautiful. I think it's best really to try and hide them as much as possible. So that central picture there, you know, just doesn't really add anything to have that stem exposed. So it's best to try and obscure it. So on the left-hand side there, you see most of the stem is obscured, and then you've just got the increased height from the tree rose going up above it. And then on the Anne Boleyn, it's a good variety for growing as a tree rose because it has quite a sort of arching, weeping habit. So it produces a lovely rounded head. And here you see a picture of the line of tree roses at the garden at David Austin Roses. There's a path the other side there, so it's a very good for highlighting the line of the pathway. In containers, they can be very good in containers too. So here we've got Desdemona. Because there's lots of light, because they're raised up off the ground, there's lots of light lower down, so they create a lovely rounded shape. And you can see the Desdemona there. If that was planted in the ground, it would be much more upright, but because it's in a pot, then it's produced this really almost arching growth on it. And you can imagine the fragrances. Remember, this is the one that I took down to my sisters, and the fragrance from it was absolutely superb. So if you had that on your patio or your terrace or something like that, where you couldn't normally plant a rose, then if you sat by that, the fragrance would be absolutely superb. This is in David Austin's private garden taken now. And then Princess Alexandra of Kent, another one with a wonderful fragrance. It's got an interesting fragrance. Actually, I'll tell you about that one later on. I'll tell you about that in the fragrance section. Basically tea and fruit, but I'll tell you a bit more. And of course, as climbers, the Austin roses in the UK at least are very much known as shrub roses rather than climbers. But we discovered, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, that actually, given half the chance, quite a few varieties do grow very well as climbers. And then we got reports back from people in warmer climates, like in the southern states of America and Australia and things like that, sort of saying that shrubs that we described as 3 or 4 foot tall just grew up to, you know, within a season, grew up to sort of 6, 8, 10 feet tall. So things like Graham Thomas and Gertrude Jekyll weren't shrub roses, they were climbers. And we found that even in the UK as well, that actually quite a few of them grow very well as climbers. So Graham Thomas, that grows superbly as a climber, Gertrude Jekyll, but also in our climate, we can keep it, if we keep on pruning it, then we can keep it short as well. So this pergola that's at the David Austin garden, what we've done is we've planted up each of the pillars, we've planted both a climber and a rambler, so that the rambler is very vigorous, grows up very quickly and goes across the top because they've got more lax stems. And then on the vertical section on the pillars, then it's the English roses growing there. And because they're not so vigorous and they're repeat flowering, then you get a beautiful effect along the vertical section and the beautiful roses hanging down from the top. So the combination of climber and rambler is really pretty, actually. One of the golden rules when you're choosing climbers for a position is to choose a variety that is the right vigor. People are very impatient, gardeners are very impatient, so they want their arch or wall or fence or whatever covered quickly. But of course, what happens is that the rose covers it quickly, but then just carries on growing. You know, it doesn't realize that you only want it to grow 8 foot tall or something like that. So it's very important to choose a variety that is the right ultimate size for that position. So Crown Princess Margareta makes a wonderful climber there. Okay, it may take 2 or 3 years to cover that archway, but then it won't be a menace after that. It'll be easy to keep under control. Whereas if you chose one of the big ramblers, then it would cover it within a season, but then it would be going all over the place and it would be quite dangerous trying to walk through there because you'd be attacked by the thorny stems. And because you were chopping it back on a regular basis, then you wouldn't get so many flowers either. So be patient and choose a variety that is the right figure for that position. As I say, Gertrude Jekyll makes a wonderful climber, and the fragrance of that is just absolutely superb. It's one of the very, very best roses for fragrance, a pure old rose fragrance. And then Generous Gardener on the right there, one of my very favorite varieties, beautiful soft pink flowers, a superb mixed fragrance, bit of myrrh, a bit of old rose, and a bit of fruit as well. And very healthy, good repeat flowering. And if you don't deadhead it, at the end of the season, a fantastic crop of hips will form and last right through the winter. Well, they do in this country anyway. I don't know about your winters, but they certainly do in this country. So altogether, wonderful, wonderful variety, one of my very favorites. And you see on the right there, Graham Thomas. I mean, you see the climber growing as a climber there. The flowers growing right from the ground, right up to the top. Absolutely fantastic plant. And the fragrance of that is the pure tea fragrance. And then Lady Charlotte, I mentioned earlier on, makes a superb climber. We've got several English roses, Austin roses in our garden, but the ones we got most of is Lady Charlotte because it is just such a good variety. Okay, let's talk a bit more about fragrance, a bit more about fragrance in detail. This picture was taken, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago at the Chelsea Flower Show, and we introduced a rose called Queen Anne. And Queen Anne was apparently responsible for recognizing where the Ascot racecourse should go. And of course, when you think of Ascot racecourse, you think of hats. So we got a milliner, the person who designs hats, to design these amazing hats. And we had these 3 or 4 models to come onto the stand. So very pretty models, all about 6 foot tall, and in these amazing clothes. So it was a rather surreal experience to have these fantastic models on our stand, launching this rose called Queen Anne. So yeah, Gertrude Jekyll. So okay, let's talk about fragrance in general. There's no other plant that has such, well, it's not quite right. Apart from the tropical epiphytic orchids, there's no other plant that has such a wide range of completely different fragrance types as the rose. So there's basically 5 sorts. There's the classic old rose fragrance, which is this one. We've got the tea fragrance, the myrrh fragrance, a whole range of different fruity fragrances, and the musky fragrance. So the old rose fragrance is perhaps the most delicious, is the most accessible one. It's the one that maybe you think of when you go to smell a rose, and it's the rose, the old rose called Kazanlink. That's the one that's grown in huge quantities in sort of Bulgaria, Romania, and North Africa for the extraction of rose oil, attar of roses, which is, if you read how many flowers are needed to produce a milliliter, tiny little bottle of oil, is absolutely vast quantities. But the smell is just absolutely superb. And of course, that rose oil is, if it's used for massaging or for smelling, it's very good for you. And also it's an ingredient of the best, most expensive perfumes in the world as well. So the most expensive ones always have a tiny, tiny bit of rose fragrance in there, of attar of roses. So Gertrude Jekyll, when that flowers, I always think, well, summer has finally arrived because the flowers are so beautiful and the fragrance is absolutely fantastic. Then you've got the tea rose fragrance. Why is it called tea rose fragrance? Well, there's a few theories behind that, but it's the proper reason why is actually smells like a freshly opened packet of China tea leaves. So it's no good trying to smell tea bags or anything like that. You've got to have the proper Chinese tea leaves. And I'm a tea fanatic myself, actually. So I love the tea fragrance. I mean, I love all the fragrances, actually, but so the tea fragrance is particularly good. And it's very, very different, completely different to the old rose fragrance. So Graham Thomas is a very classic tea fragrance, whereas Port Sunlight is a bit more tarry. As in tar that you would put in oils, in roads. So quite different. So it's always worth trying to compare flowers. So if you pick 2 or 3 flowers and then sort of smell one and then immediately smell another one. So a bit like tasting tea or coffee, or if you're a taster of tea or coffee and you have them all lined up and you can just compare them, or wines, of course, as well. But the tea fragrance of Graham Thomas and the tea fragrance of Port Sunlight, very different, but you can still see that they're related. The myrrh fragrance, that word myrrh doesn't relate to the biblical myrrh. It comes from the Latin name for the herb called sweet cicely. This Latin name is called Myrrhis odorata. And in some parts of the country, the Myrrhis odorata, sweet cicely, is called the myrrh plant. And it has a sort of aniseed type fragrance. So if you know the drink that they drink in France called pastis or pernod, it has a sort of aniseed fragrance. And that's really what the fragrance of the myrrh fragrance smells like. But again, it varies hugely from variety to variety. And it's very divisive. So some people absolutely love it. Like me, I love it. But some people really don't like it at all. And they think it smells sort of like hospitals, which is not a very pleasant fragrance at all. So you have to sort of smell it and just see what you think about that. But Constant Spry is a pure myrrh fragrance. And that photograph, unfortunately, I never saw it. That was taken at the Pixar studios in California. And just amazing, amazing shot. I don't expect they're there anymore, because that photograph has been with us for many, many years. So I would think, I'd love to know if it was still there, but I somehow doubt it. And then Boscobel, lovely myrrh fragrance, lovely mixture of myrrh and with various other constituents. Very, very strong, very distinctive fragrance. Fruity fragrance, there's a huge range, just about every single fruit that you can imagine, you'll find the equivalent in rose flowers. So Jubilee Celebration is often very citrus, and to me it's often very, like lemon zest, like the skin of lemons. And Lady Emma Hamilton is just the most delicious, rounded, fruity fragrance. It's sometimes quite citrus, but other times it's like guavas and lychees. And I always encourage people to smell that at the nursery, and they always come up with a smile on their face, because it's just is so such a easily recognizable and delicious fragrance. And the flowers are very beautiful as well. And the leaves are very dark. So in spring, when the leaves are still just emerging from the buds, they're very, very dark color. Then sort of even when they're fully mature, they're still quite dark. Some varieties are not one fragrance, they're a great mixture. So things like Munstead Wood, it's a wonderful mixture of old rose and fruit, sort of the darker fruits, things like damsons and blackberries and things like that. And then Princess Alexandra of Kent, it starts off as a tea fragrance, and then as the flower ages, it becomes more citrusy. and as it ages even more, it becomes more like black currants. So it's always important when you go to smell a rose is not to smell just one flower, because quite often the first flower you smell may not have a fragrance, then the second one will have a lovely fragrance, and then you may smell a third one and that has a slightly different fragrance. So always don't dismiss a rose just because the first flower you smell doesn't have a fragrance. It may have a beautiful fragrance on another flower. And it depends on the time of day. So it's a very dry, hot weather at the time, then often it's not very good time to smell. So I always find usually that first thing in the morning, when it's in a lovely humid morning, very first thing, then that's the best time to smell roses. But I think later on in the evening is good too. As Myra said, then just smelling roses is the best thing to do. And always, if you have got a rose, if you're planting a rose which is got a wonderful fragrance, then plant it so that somewhere that it's really easily accessible. No good planting it tucked away at the back of a border or somewhere you have to fight to get to it. Plant it close to the edge of a path or border or something like that. So every time you pass it, then you can give it a jolly good sniff and benefit hugely from it. And then, of course, bring the flower in the house as well. So I learned all I have about smelling roses from a wonderful chap called Robert Calkin, who was a retired nose, and he used to come up 2, 3 times, 4 times a year and smell our roses and describe them. And so I had this dreadful job of having to walk around with him and smell roses all day long. I mean, just I had some dreadful jobs to do at David Austin's, but that was the very worst of them all. So we came to Buttercup, and just about every other rose he would say, oh yes, that smells like old rose, or it's got old rose, a bit of fruit in it, or myrrh with tea or whatever. But that rose, he could never actually identify the fragrance of it. He could just say, that's a delicious fragrance, absolutely wonderful. And so it is just the most superb fragrance, I think. And it's a very pretty flower as well. And then when I always went down to the nursery, to the garden at the nursery, I always used to pick a flower of that and carry it around with me and sniff it and then take it back to the office and put it on my desk. And one day I did that, and instead of the normal delicious fragrance, it smelled like cocoa powder, which was just absolutely amazing. So, and I smelt it vaguely once since then. So that's another very good reason to smell roses on a very regular basis. You might sometimes be very surprised about what fragrance will come out of a rose. The other absolutely wonderful thing to do with roses, of course, is to cut them and bring them in the house. So maybe towards the end of the season, when the weather is not so good, but even just in the height of the season, it doesn't have to be a great big arrangement. It can just be a single flower in a vase. So you see them on the left-hand picture, right-hand picture there, the middle vase is just one stem in there. So it just looks so beautiful. And then the other ones have just got 1, 2 extra flowers in them. And then tiny little posy on the left-hand side there, that's Jubilee Celebration with, I've forgotten the name of the blue flower now, and Chooser. Just looks very pretty. So you can just imagine that on a bedside table or something like that, or in the middle of a small table in the kitchen maybe. So then you can just smell it and really appreciate it to the full. Or it can be a bit more of a full-blown arrangement like that, with Golden Celebration and various other roses, just a bit of a, not monstrous, but big arrangement, making a real statement. So there you are. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope, I know I'm sure you're already very keen on roses, but hopefully that'll inspire you to plant a few more in your garden, inspire other people to plant lots in their garden too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing your wisdom in roses with all of us here. Now we're going to start the Q&A. If you would like to ask anything to Mr. Marriott, this is a wonderful opportunity to do so, especially at the start of gardening season. So just raise your hand, or you can also tell us on the chat room if you have a question for him, and then we'll go ahead and just take everyone individually. So, let's see. Katarzyna. Let's see. Oh, hold on. We're gonna have to.
Hey. Oh,
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. Michael, I've bought 2 splendid bushes of old Wallerton house roses.
Yeah.
But in our climate, from my nursery in Poland, it's zone B. It's described as a high shrubs. I would like to train them as a climbers. Is it possible? And if it is, how should I act with them?
So this would be against the wall of a house, would it?
Yes, it's on the fence.
Yeah. I think it should be possible because you're zone 6, are you, in the States?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Poland. I'm from Europe.
Yeah. Oh, so you're actually listening to it from Poland. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Very good. See, that's the advantage of these Zoom lectures. That's brilliant. I've heard actually recently that Wollerton Old Hall is quite a winter hardy variety. How cold does it get to in where you are?
Generally, this winter we've got something -20 centigrades, and both bushes are quite well.
Oh, are they?
And they are very young. They are very young because I planted them last year.
Right, that's good. What direction will the fence face?
They are good position, something like southwest.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah, so it's just a matter of planting at the face of the bottom of the fence, and then just trying to fan the stems out to get maximum number of flowers. And of course, you don't want to prune them, or only prune them very lightly in the first 2 or 3 years. And then you should get lots and lots of flowers from it. It's quite a vigorous rose. There's one at the David Austin Nursery that planted up east-facing wall, and that must be maybe 4 meters tall or something like that, and looking absolutely superb. So yeah, presumably your fence is only what, 2 meters tall or something, is it?
Yes, something like 180 centimeters on 1.8 meter.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, if you fan the stems out, then you should be able to cover quite a wide area. I mean, I suppose if you forecast some very, very cold weather, then it might be an idea to give it a bit of protection with fleece or something like that. But you know, it should be all right. As I say, I've heard that it is a very winter hardy variety, so hopefully you should be right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up it's Sapreet. She has a question for you.
Hello, hi Michael. Thank you so much for a fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
I have been really keen to grow a rose garden, and
where are you?
I'm in West Sussex.
All right, okay.
Yeah, so I'm in West Sussex, and there's a couple of things, like I've got a design in my mind, but I was just wondering now that I was just wondering whether there's any books you could direct me to. But also I visited Mottisfont last year to get some inspiration, and we had such a hot year, and it's so hot here in West Sussex, and my garden's really exposed to the light. It's beautiful, there's lots of sunlight, but I'm a little bit nervous now because Mottisfont, all the roses were completely decimated with the heat. And I have a gardener friend who's like going, "You're crazy just going for roses," and you know. But it's like a real heart longing to grow a rose garden and create this.
What's your soil like?
Pardon?
What sort of soil do you have?
It's sandy, and where I'm planning to dig the beds up, it's a lawn at the moment. So I dig the beds up and would bring in compost. But on the whole, it's classed as a sandy, sometimes clay. It's a bit odd, actually.
Right.
Here,
yeah. Roses really don't like growing on sandy soil, so you have to you work quite hard to add plenty of organic matter to the soil before planting, and then mulch it on a very regular basis as well. So give it a jolly good mulch each spring, probably around now, and that will help to keep the moisture in the ground. And then because the soil will dry out so quickly, then you might want to consider installing an irrigation system of some sort. So obviously you can go around and water them with a hose pipe or something like that. But there's a very simple irrigation system you can use. It's just called drip irrigation. So it's just a pipe that you sort of lay on the surface or just under the compost, and it just comes out of holes in the pipe. So it's very cheap, very easy to install. Don't go for leaky hose, because that never lasts very long, gets blocked up. But the drip irrigation should last well several years. And so it's just a matter of switching it on maybe once a week or something like that, and give it a jolly good soaking. And that will help hugely with keeping your roses looking really good. But mulch, so plenty of organic matter mixed into the soil beforehand, and mulch really well each year once it's planted. And choose really tough varieties. I mean, that's a general thing about roses. Is always important to be very fussy about what varieties you choose. So especially on your sandy soil, you want to really go for really tough varieties. And so see what is looking good in gardens around you if they've got similar soils, and ask people who know about what varieties would be good. And that'll be a big help to it. So don't choose any wimpy varieties, otherwise they'll never flourish very well.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you so much. And I'll definitely do your course.
Good.
And I was just wondering, was there any book that you'd recommend for the design process? Or just...
Not really. No, I mean the course, the Learning of Experts course, that would I touched on it on that, and that without saying too much, there might be a book in the pipeline about it too.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you.
Interesting. How do you and Katerina? How did you hear about the lecture?
I saw it come up on the David Austin Facebook page.
Oh, right. Okay. Well done. and Katerina, how did you hear about it?
I'm also on a Facebook.
Okay.
I'm in a group of international David Austin Roses lovers or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember exactly, because there are many Rosomanies groups on Facebook, and I joined a few of them.
Okay.
So from Facebook generally.
Good. Okay, that's good.
All right, and now Tasha Logan has a question for you, Michael.
Okay.
Oh, well, there we go. Now you can hear me. First, thank you. This has been great. I've learned loads. My question is, I have clay, loamy soil, but I have high humidity on the East Coast. I'm in Maryland. Is there a variety or two that you would suggest?
Well, a clay, loamy soil sounds absolutely ideal for roses. People, they love that. So, I mean, often you read books and they say they love clay, but of course there's clay and there's clay. So, there's potter's clay, there's sort of a loamy type clay. So loamy type clay sounds ideal, still worth adding some organic matter into it. Really, what colours have you got in mind? Any preference?
No, I'm blessed that I pretty much have a blank canvas, so
right.
Anything is wonderful.
Okay. Have you got the David Austin catalogue?
Yes.
Okay. What the general rule is, because your climate is not too extreme there at all. The general rule is if the catalogue has a whole page devoted to one variety, then they're generally very, very good varieties. If there's just sort of half a page or quarter page, they're still very good, but not quite so top of the range, as it were. And if they're online only, then maybe they're it's still worth. I think all the varieties are worthwhile in there, but they may be a bit more difficult to grow. But having said that, if you've got good soil like that, and your climate is not too extreme, then I wouldn't be too fussy about which ones you choose. But the toughest of the lot would be the ones which are got sort of one page devoted to them. So things like Olivia Rose Austin and Vanessa Bell, Gabriel Oak, one of the new ones, Desdemona. They'll all be very, very good varieties.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Next up is Christoph Kopowski. Let's see, Christoph.
Christoph Kopowski, yeah. That's right. Yes, thank you for the nice lecture. And I would like to ask how long I could use rose seeds, because I have some rose seeds here. I put them in the fridge, very, very cold, and then I put them out. And yesterday I planted some. I don't know. Is there a date when they expire nearly?
Is this Christoph from Instagram?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello,
Mike. I think rose seeds, if you store them well, then they'll last many years. So always the secret is to keep them. I mean, you could even freeze them, because of course that's how they're stored in these very long-term storage units, isn't it? Where they sort of hopefully going to keep them at sort of minus I don't know, 25 or 30 degrees centigrade or something like that, and they last for huge lengths of time. So I would keep them. Have you kept them dry or damp?
I think not dry, no.
They're damp. That's good. So, and you kept them in the fridge, have you?
Yeah, in the fridge, in the freezer.
In the freezer. That's very good. Yeah, you should be fine. So well worth trying, and I think you should be very successful, actually. Yeah.
I hope so. I will show some pictures.
Where did you collect the seed from? Was it just some hips that you saw, or?
Sorry?
Where did you collect the seed from?
I think we have a bad connection here. It's an old rose, and it's a climber, I think, and I'm not sure which rose it is, but it's so beautiful, and I want to give it as a present to someone.
Oh, well. I don't want to be negative about it, but very often the seedlings that come from roses are very poor, not nearly as good as the original variety, but you never know. You might be lucky. It might be something very beautiful and very garden worthy. So always worth a try, always good fun.
I hope so. Thank you.
Good luck.
All right, next up is Carol from Western Kentucky. Carol. Are you still there?
Yes. 2 David Austin roses arrived yesterday, the Bathsheba. I'm thinking about putting them in pots and then transplanting them later when I decide what is going to be the perfect location. Is that advisable, or do I need to go ahead and put them into the ground rather than thinking about moving them shortly?
I always think putting them in the ground is the best best solution. Roses move remarkably well. So if at the end of the season you decide, oh no, that's not the right place, I could plant them in a better place, then they move very, very easily and very, very, very well. And if you grow them in pots, then you know if it's hot weather and you go away for the weekend or something like that, they're going to dry out very quickly, and then they'll suffer as a result. I always think growing roses, I mean, unless it's a great big pot, but then you're going to have struggle to transplant it really. So I would, if you can, plant it straight into the ground, be much, much better.
And if I could pose a second question, you mentioned watering earlier. Do you suggest a once a week really good deep watering as opposed to more frequent?
It depends on your soil type and where, and, you know, the climate you live in. So if it's a very hot climate, then you might have to consider watering it maybe twice a week or something like that. And if you've got very sandy soil, again, maybe more frequently. It's always better to water very heavily, less frequently, rather than lots of bits and pieces all the time. Because if for any reason the irrigation system fails, then the very frequent and little waterings are going to encourage a rather superficial root system, and it'll be more subject to drying out and suffering than if it's got a really good deep root system that is you'll get as a result of infrequent heavy waterings. Always very important when you water roses is to the worst time to water it is in the evening, because then the chances are that leaves are going to stay wet, and that's the best way of encouraging black spot. So if you do water, you know, the hose pipe and the leaves get all wet, then if that's your system, or you have a sort of a sprinkler system that comes on in the evening, then change it to coming on in the morning, but not sort of very, very early in the morning. Ideally, it should be at a time when the leaves are going to be able to dry out quickly. So maybe, you know, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning or something like that. If you water, the leaves get wet, the leaves will dry out quickly, and then they're less likely to suffer from black spot. That's very important.
All right, next up it's Rama.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for that wonderful lecture. My question is, I'm having problems with aphids and black spots and those white things as well. Is there anything I can use aside from the spray ones, which we can buy from garden centers, a more natural one?
Aphids, I always think, whereabouts are you?
I'm in Coventry.
Coventry, oh right, England.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's different towns in states. They steal all our place names, town names.
Oh, yeah.
I always think aphids are very easy to control. The best way of controlling them actually is just to encourage as many beneficial insects into your garden as possible. And you do that by planting things like Phacelia tanacitifolia, you know, the plant that I showed in the picture, in the slides. But generally, well, if you go on something like the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society website, you'll see lists of plants that are very good for attracting insects into the garden, and then they'll help to control the aphids on your roses. And always remember that actually a few aphids in your garden is good, because they're the food for keeping the beneficial insects in your garden. If there's no food for them to eat, then they're either going to die of starvation, or they're going to buzz off next door. So don't be worried about a few aphids in your garden. That's a good thing. If you've got a real infestation, if the buds are completely covered with them, then I always think the best way of doing it is maybe squashing them with your fingers, which you might not like to do very much, but it's a very good way of doing it. Or the other thing is just to give it a smart tap with your hand, and most of them will drop off. They'll fall onto the ground, and then they won't be able to climb back up. So, or the other thing you can do is to give them a strong jet of water from your hose pipe or something like that. So rather than reaching for any sort of spray, then try and do things as naturally as possible. I've been growing roses in my own garden now for well over 30 years, and I've never had to spray them at all, because I always mix up my roses with other plants in the garden, and that helps to control things very, very well. And I say, if things get very bad, then just give it a quick hit or squash with your fingers, and there you are, job done.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask for one more question, please?
Sure. You asked about black spot and things like that. So the best way of stopping that is to choose varieties that are very healthy. And so a lot of the varieties that I showed on my talk this evening, they're all very, very good, healthy varieties. And if you have got 1 or 2 plants in your garden that are particularly bad for disease, then really you should, as the Americans say very nicely, you should shovel prune them. So in other words, you should dig them up and throw them away, because they'll be spreading spores around everywhere, and then making more disease for the other roses. So any particularly bad ones, dig them up, throw them away, and plant a better rose in its place. Sorry, so what was your other question?
I really love your Juliet rose. But
Which
is
one?
there any way, the Juliet rose, the
Okay.
cut flower one,
All
is
right.
there anything that we can buy that we can grow here in the UK that's somewhat similar to a Juliet, or like a cut flower we can do as a cut flower?
Oh no.
Unfortunately, those cut flower varieties aren't available to buy as plants, and anyway, they would make fairly dreadful plants, because the disease resistance, they're bred to be grown inside greenhouses, and so the disease resistance would probably be very bad, and they would be ugly plants as well. There's a variety called Sweet Juliet, which I'm not sure if it's still sold or not, but you could look that up, and that's quite similar. And I suppose a similar color would be something like Royal Dahl. It's a different sort of shape of flower, but it's a sort of similar color. And then of course, Lady of Shalott is a similar sort of color as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, and Miss Lauren Cope with the pretty flowers in her background.
Hi, Michael, thank you so much for this presentation. I work in a historic rose garden outside of Philadelphia, and we grow pretty much strictly old garden roses. I've been a horticulturist, so I'm kind of new to the rose game. So I'm kind of casually experimenting with propagating some of our roses for sale. And I was wondering if you have any tips on kind of whether to do softwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings, seed, what's the kind of best turnaround, I suppose, for making a saleable plant?
The first thing I should, so if they're old historic varieties, are they?
Yes.
Probably the best way is sort of hardwood cuttings, maybe taken in sort of September, October time. If you've got a bit of a sophisticated propagation unit with mist and things like that, then you could try taking softer wood ones in the summer, and they tend to root very quickly, but you need a sort of mist irrigation system really for that. That could work very well. And that would be, you'd get a quicker rooting and so quicker saleable plants as well. Whereas if you root hardwood cuttings, then you're maybe looking at, maybe even a couple of years before you've got a half decent plant for selling. The thing was also to remember that some roses are very happy to grow from cuttings, but others are very, very reluctant or just refuse to. So if
I'm starting to notice that.
Yeah, and so if you have a couple of years of failures, then it's not your fault. It's the plant who just doesn't want to grow from cuttings.
That's good to hear. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay, next up, it's Cole Griffin. Cole?
Hi, could you tell us more about the Emily Bronte rose, please?
Emily Bronte. Yeah, it's lovely. It's a fairly upright rose, actually, that one. And whereabouts are you? Where do you live?
United States in Wisconsin, near Lake Michigan.
Okay. Oh, so what, zone 5?
Yes, zone 5.
Yeah. Okay. It should be hardy in zone 5. It's such a new variety that it probably hasn't been tested out yet. So you might want to just give it possibly a bit of winter protection there, just in case, especially if it's a really cold winter. It's a relatively upright variety, but beautiful flowers and a lovely fragrance. And it should be very, very healthy variety as well. So yeah, it should be a lovely rose for the garden. I think it's a sort of rose that would look very beautiful with blue coloured perennials or purple, things like salvias. I suppose salvias would be tricky in your climate, but some of the geraniums and catmint, nepeta and things like that would look very lovely with that, I think.
All right, next up is Janet Miller.
Hi, this is Janet.
Hello.
Hi, Michael, that was wonderful. Oh, how fun. And I loved your fragrance category because I'm so into fragrance and I love a lot of color. And so the Falstaff was particularly appealing to me, and I'm wondering, does that have fragrance?
Yeah, it's got a lovely old rose fragrance. It's Falstaff is one of those varieties that doesn't flower all that freely, but when it does, they're sort of magnificent, great big flowers, and yeah, very deeply cupped and most wonderful color as well. I'm not sure, is it still offered? It's one of those, I have to look it up on the website to see if it's still...
I don't know. Munstead Wood is real popular around here.
Yes.
And that's a dark, very fragrant variety.
Yes.
But I was just looking for something different.
Yeah, it's still, well, this is last year's catalogue, and it's still in there, so hopefully it should still be available. Red roses are very difficult to breed. Good red roses are very difficult to breed. They tend to be, if they're very fragrant, they tend to be not quite so healthy. But if they're very healthy, then they don't tend to be so fragrant. So a bit tricky. But Munstead Wood is most beautiful rose, fantastic fragrance, but the health is not brilliant. But it's, I think that we still grow it here in the UK. Even though it's not the healthiest of roses, it's just such a beautiful flower, and that color is absolutely fantastic too. But Falstaff, as you say, is very lovely, fantastic color, and a very different shape of flower. You can grow it as a climber, actually. It's got rather stiff growth, so it may be better grown as a climber, so you can sort of train it and fan the stems out a bit more, and hopefully encourage a few more flowers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Next up is Nicole Berberina. Nicole.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
I'm on Long Island in New York.
Okay.
And I am actually wondering about transplanting because I have one that's, I'm only about 5'3", and one that gets quite tall. It goes to about 6 feet, and if I let it taller, and that one's great. But then there's this very, very tiny apricot-y one that my dad had planted, and it has sentimental value because he did pass away. And I'm trying to get it to be bigger, but it's really only about 1 foot tall, and it's only been 1 foot tall for about 5 years, maybe longer. Yeah, it gets, maybe a foot and a half. It's just, it could be 2 feet on its, you know, good summers, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I tried feeding it some rose food last summer, and I'm just not sure if it's in the right place.
I mean, some varieties, of course, are bred to stay very short. And so maybe it's the natural height is to be only 1 or 2 feet tall. But if it's, yeah, it's worth trying to move it. Presumably your roses they've got quite big shoots on them now, have they?
Yeah, the one that is as tall as me has plenty of shoots, and this one is just tiny. Even its foliage never gets full, you know, so I'm wondering.
But it might be a miniature, you know, a miniature rose, in which case, you know, I'd say that's bred to be that size. But yeah, the best time to move it would be in the fall. So probably about well, when the leaves are starting to fall, really, from the rose, which would what I'd be guessed October time or something like that. Or you could move it also in very early spring, just when it's starting to grow a bit. And then just make sure when you dig it up, you probably find the soil will all drop off, but make sure that try and plant it as quickly as possible afterwards, and never allow the roots to dry out. Always keep the roots damp before you replant it. But roses move very, very well, and so you should have good success.
Okay, thank you so much. If it's actually a mini, would it be favorable to put it in a pot?
You can do. You just got to remember that they need to be watered on a fairly regular basis, and so you know, if you go away on holiday or on weekends or something like that, then you've got to think about getting it watered. So roses in pots can be very beautiful, but it's just the watering business and feeding.
Okay,
as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, next up is Caitlin Farley.
Hi, Michael. This
Hello.
is Tim. I'm with Caitlin and Ryan, and we are in Kentucky, Frankfort, Kentucky. Just very quickly, I'm wondering, because of the productivity of these English roses, so many flowers, so many petals, what kind of fertility program do you need to keep that up, to keep production up on those flowers, on those plants?
You mean in terms of fertilizer?
So yes.
So
how much nitrogen is it?
Yeah.
Do you put it a lot on these?
No, the production of the flowers doesn't take really too much extra energy. So just a normal fertilizer regime that you would put on your other roses. When it comes to putting fertilizer on roses, it's always important to actually put on what it advises on the packet. So, you know, if it says so many ounces per rose or so many ounces per square yard, then be careful to put that on, because actually if you start thinking, oh, well, that rose is not growing well, I'll put a bit more on, you actually might be doing more harm than good. So it's always a very important rule to apply the amount of fertilizer that it says on the packet, and then scatter it around nicely around underneath the branches.
Okay, good, thank you. It seems that the plants are so productive from top to bottom, and thought it might be something particular to make that continue happening throughout the season, but
no,
sounds good.
I mean, if it's a great big climate, if it's a big, you know, if it's a really big bush, then you might want to put a little bit more on, or if it's a climber or something like that. But if it's a sort of normal 3 to 4 foot, 5 foot bush, then normal amount should be fine.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
All right, next question is from Julie Shuckman.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and we're faced with Zone 7B. We're faced with a challenger that a lot of London gardeners are, since we're urban. So my garden is very long and narrow. It's only about 17 feet wide.
Gosh, right.
So I was wondering if you had, I mean, I have a lot of climbers. I have a 23-year-old Abe Darby,
Gosh.
which has survived remarkably well. I know they discontinued it, but I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for the the person stuck with a small gardener who's a rose addict. So, you know, we have problems with overcrowding, we get black spot, but, you know, and that's par for the course. But yeah. I wonder what you think.
So you're talking about shrub roses rather than climbing roses, are you?
Yes, I actually have climbers. I have Shropshire Lad, and I have a Darby, as I said, but I also have a lot of shrub roses. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, well, if you look at the catalogue on the website, then you'll see the final height of the rose. So always go for the shorter ones, and always remember that's very much of a guideline. And so it's you know, if it says 4 foot in the catalogue, then with a bit of a harder pruning, you could actually keep it down to 3 foot without too much trouble. And then if during the summer after the first flush it starts getting a bit tall, rather than just deadheading the flowers, then you could cut it back a little bit harder and reduce the height that way. So you can manipulate the size of them to a certain extent.
Okay, that's helpful.
The most important thing is to choose relatively short varieties in the first place.
Yes, okay, I'll have to discipline myself since there are a lot of larger ones I like.
and as I said, if you're getting bad black spot, then as I said to one of the previous people, you know, identify which your worst culprits are, and then shovel prune them, and then you've got you've got a chance then to buying some nice new varieties in.
That's true. Okay, well, I'm trying the newer ones this time, Gabriel Oak, Cassia Vise, to see, because they're supposed to be healthy. So I'm trying them this year, and I'll see how they do.
Yeah, I mean, Gabriel Oak is quite a vigorous variety, but it's quite upright. And Eustacia Vi is actually similar as well. So it won't be sort of too wide and bushy. You know, some varieties also look at the width. So something like Litchfield Angel grows quite wide.
Right.
So, you know, if it's
I have to be careful of that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so something like Queen of Sweden is very narrow and upright. So maybe that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate your help. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care.
All right, next question is from Malia Green. Malia Green.
I was just wondering about how close you plant the bushes in the David Austin gardens. You mentioned that you planted them a bit closer together to have that uniform consistency and hedgerows of sorts. I was just wondering if you had any specifics on the distancing.
It does depend on the variety and the climate very much. But in the UK, because it's such a big rose garden, then all the varieties are planted in groups of one variety. So there may be 3, 4, 5, 6 plants of the same variety planted quite closely together. And the general rule there is somewhere between 18 inches and 2 feet between plants of the same variety. And then between plants of neighboring varieties, you plant them maybe 3 or 4 feet apart, so that you can identify each one. So each one is not, it doesn't just create a sort of solid mass. Then you can identify each variety. So each variety stands out as a different group. And also you can get in then for weeding and deadheading and things like that. But if you've got just, you know, if you've got your garden isn't so big as the David Austin ones, which most people aren't, then you've just got one plant of one variety, then general rule would be sort of about 3 feet or something like that. But it depends so much on your climate and on the variety as well.
Okay. All right. I guess next up is Jessie Bickerton. Jessie.
Hi, thank you
Hello.
for the discussion. How are you?
Good, thank you. Very good.
Good. I'm in British Columbia, Canada, zone 8B. I'll try to start my video here. I'm hiding in my bathroom from my family. So my thing is, what would you say is the most important thing for the soil? Because I moved some and they're still not thriving, and it actually seems kind of similar to what somebody else said before. They're staying kind of small. And I did have them by a cedar hedgerow, so I've moved them from there. But if I was going to do something to amend my soil, what would you say is key?
Well-rotted organic matter. That's the most important thing. But not too much. So, you know, if you, for one planting hole, maybe 2 shovelfuls or something like that would be enough.
Okay.
And not a peat-based product, but I mean, I don't know, in the UK here, you can buy manure in bags these days, which is very good stuff. And it's usually, if you buy it in bags from garden centers, then it'll be sterile, because often if you use manure straight from the stables, then it'll be full of weed seeds, and then you're sort of creating lots of problems. And often it's not very well rotted either. So if you use an organic matter that's not very well rotted, then it actually can do more harm than good, in that it takes nitrogen out of the soil originally. So whatever you mix in, it's got to be really well rotted. So the other thing you can buy over here in the UK is what they call soil improver, and that is very good, very well rotted and completely sterile as well. So those are the 2 things that I'd be looking out for. Do you fertilize your roses?
I do. I just did it once a season. We have a gentleman here that is a rose specialist, and so he said, just once, just do it kind of at the start. So I did do that. I think I'm overwatering them based on what you've said today. I think I'm overwatering them. And I also go and stare at them every day. and he advised not to do that, to give them a little space. So I think the manure will probably be good, just kind of amending the soil a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you think you're overwatering them, always what I do if I'm asked to go to a garden where the roses aren't doing well, the first thing I do, I say, give me a spade and I'll dig a hole and see what the soil is like, and that very often immediately tells you what the problem is. So it might be too much competition of the roots from roots from other plants, you know, whether it's a hedge or a tree or something like that. It might be perennials growing too closely to get to that. Or in your case, if you think you're overwatering, then just dig a hole down to 9-12 inches and see what the soil is like. And if it's too wet, then yeah, you're overwatering. And also smell the soil. You know, if it smells nice and earthy, then you're okay. But if it sort of smells really unpleasant, then you're creating what we call anaerobic condition. There's no air in there. And the roots, well, they just won't grow in that at all. They'll just rot off. They won't go down into it at all. So, yeah, I mean, in British Columbia, I think you have the climate there is probably going to be fairly similar to here in the UK, and so you probably hardly need to water at all, really, unless you have a very long dry spell. Then I would turn your irrigation system off altogether.
Yeah, so sometimes we don't have to water for months because of our rain, our lovely rain. But okay, that's wonderful. And so if we're coming to visit the Gardens of England, we're coming end of June, beginning of July, once we can travel. Is that your suggestion?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you for the talk today.
Okay.
A pleasure. And I think the last person to have a question, it will be Estella Viljoen from the Netherlands. Stella? Estella, are you there?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yes, I'm from the Netherlands, and all my roses is in pots because I only had a balcony, and everybody said mulch, 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 but with what? Because they said no wood snips, no bark snippers. So I really don't know what to mulch it with. And the other question I had can you overfeed your roses?
Yeah, so you can overfeed your roses. We had a dreadful problem at the David Austin garden many years ago where the roses looked very poor. And we found that we did a soil analysis and we found that the phosphate and potash levels were extremely high and it caused deficiency and the roses just looked absolutely dreadful. So all they applied then was nitrogen to the roses.
Oh, okay.
So in terms of what you can mulch your roses with, I mean, you should be able to go along to your garden centre and just buy mulch in bags.
Yes, they have that, but it's all bark snippers or wood snips. And somebody said it takes the water out of your pots. You must not put too much of that on top of it. You must mulch with compost. So I really don't know. No, if it's just on top, it'll be fine. It won't be taking the water out of the compost. It'll be helping to stop it from evaporating. So yeah, that should be absolutely fine. And certainly in the States, they tend to use a lot of just wood chips on top of the soil, quite a thick layer of about sort of 5-10 centimeters or something like that. And it helps to conserve the moisture in the ground extremely well. Thank you. Thank you very much for the lecture.
Okay, pleasure.
And I think that sums it up. I don't think anyone else has any questions. Really quickly, anyone? No. All right, thank you so much.
May I ask a short question?
Yeah.
May I ask one short question?
Yeah, sure.
Michael, I've heard that Epsom salt is very useful while breeding roses to reduce black spot disease. Is it true?
I hadn't heard that to help reduce black spot. I know certainly in the States, a lot of rose growers seem to be quite keen on using Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, I think it is. It's not something that anybody does, I think, in the UK here. So I've never had actually experience of it. Do you know anything about it, Myra, at all, of using Epsom salts?
No, not at all. Janet, president of
definitely. I use Epsom salts at the base of the plant, you know, close to the root, but not on the root ball or on the graft anyway. About 2 tablespoons will give you new basil shoots.
All right.
Yep. Great tip.
Good.
And I also put Epsom salts in my spray material.
Okay. So what helps with black spot?
It must. It just makes the bush more healthy. And of course, we know that a healthy bush fights off black spot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Excellent. There you are.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hey, Janet. All right. Last call. Anyone? Anyone else with questions for Mr. Marriott? All right, then. Well, this sums it up for all of us. It was our pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again. So stay tuned. We will be sending you an overview of the presentation and also a YouTube link for the lecture today on YouTube. So stay tuned the next couple of days from Cranbury Hill.
Thanks very much, Mara, for organizing this. You're very good. Very well done.
All righty. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay.